welcome to the 2022 Texas Tribune Festival. We're happy you're here, and a reminder that good manners and good behavior makes for a good fest for all. These are polarized times, so please be respectful and civil. Even when you see someone or hear something you don't like, enjoy the show.
What a crowd. Larry. Hey, everybody. I love it. Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you.
Well, I wish you had some admirers here, but maybe we can drum up some enthusiasm. Thank you all for coming. You know the rules, I think. Silence your cell phones. I'm going to ask questions for 40 or 50 minutes, and then I'll take questions from the audience. There aren't any microphones in the Paramount, so you'll have to text to a number that's on the screen. Don't worry, when we get around to that, the number will reappear on the screen, so you can text it to that number, and the questions will be read from the podium, and we'll take them in that fashion. And after this, Beto's agreed to sign copies of his new book. We've got to try. And I've read this book. It's fascinating as a campaign book. First of all, most of it is a very stern look at Texas history. Voter suppression and oppression of minorities. It's the first Texas history I've read that has no mention of the Alamo. So even on that, it's a totally novel type of work. And it's dedicated to a man named Lawrence Nixon. Would you mind telling us who he is and why you dedicated this book to him?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. The reason his story matters so much to me right now is that I think many of us, if not all of us in Texas, feel like we're up against threats and challenges that we've never seen, faced, or even imagined before. Total ban on abortion without exception for rape or incest that begins at conception in a state that has one of the highest maternal mortality rates in the world, 3 times as deadly for black women. Nearly 18 weeks, nothing's changed in this state to make it any less likely that any other child will meet the same fate as those kids in Uvalde on the 24th of May of this year. The grid doesn't work, and our democracy is under attack unlike any time in our history, at least for the last 100 years or so. It's harder to vote or to register to vote in this state than in any other in the Union. This book, and specifically Dr. Nixon's story, reminds us that not only can we overcome these challenges, but we have overcome them before against much larger odds. And his story illustrates this. So 1923, 99 years ago, the Texas legislature outlawed voting by African Americans in the state of Texas. And to be clear, it was not how many bubbles are in this bar of soap, or how many jelly beans in the jar, or can you recite the Texas Constitution. It literally said in black and white that African Americans could not participate in the Democratic Party primary. In the 1920s, the Republican Party was effectively non-existent. There literally wasn't even a Republican Party primary. So the outcome in the Democratic primary was dispositive. Whoever won that primary would be your governor, your member of Congress, your state rep, your justice of the peace. So Lawrence Nixon, African-American physician in El Paso, Texas, who had never missed an election prior to 1923, was as civically engaged as a human could be at that time, especially if you were a black man in the state of Texas, nonetheless pays his poll tax in 1924, takes it to fire station number 5, which was his normal polling place, waits in line, gets to the front of the line. The election judges know him by name and by face because He's voted in every election before this one. And they say to Dr. Nixon, Dr. Nixon, you know that we can't let you vote. And Dr. Nixon replies, I know you can't, but I've got to try. And for the next 21 years, and just think about how long that is to live with this kind of indignity, he fights this battle, takes it to the Supreme Court, wins 2 signal victories there, and by 1944, with Smith versus Allwright, is finally able to win the integration of elections in the state of Texas, at least partially, because African Americans are still living under Jim Crow. But the point I make in this book about Dr. Lawrence Nixon's leadership is that not only did he win those Supreme Court cases and win the integration of voting, but he laid the path for LBJ, the first Texas president, to sign the Voting Rights Act into law in 1965, and for Barbara Jordan to be able to reauthorize it in 1975, significantly expanding access to the ballot box. So, the first multiracial democracy in American history was born right here in Texas. And if we have the harshest attacks against the right to vote in this state, which we do, we also have the capacity to produce the champions who will overcome them. And that's why I feel so confident about our ability to do that right now against any of these challenges that we face at this moment.
Another thing that makes this book unusual as a campaign book is there's no biography in here of the candidate. And so I thought I would try to mend that a little bit, and so we can have the campaign book that you might have written. So you were born in El Paso 50 years ago on Monday.
That's right.
Refresh my memory, has there ever been a candidate from El Paso to win statewide office?
There was, around this same time in the 1920s, a gentleman named R.E. Thomason, who became Speaker of the House in his 20s from El Paso, Texas. I think ran for governor or lieutenant governor, some statewide office, lost, became a member of Congress, then served as the mayor of El Paso, and then sat as a federal district judge. And in fact, this is told in the book, in 1954, this extraordinary young woman named Thelma White, who'd graduated from Douglas High School, the all African-American high school, the only place she was allowed to go to school. She graduates and tries to go to Texas Western College, now known as the University of Texas at El Paso, and is denied entry based on the color of her skin. Like Lawrence Nixon, who won that incredible victory a decade before, she takes it to the courts. She believes that we've got to try. Whatever they tell us, we have got to try. And she takes it to R.E. Thomason's bench, wins a victory there that not only integrates Texas Western College, but integrates all of higher learning across the state of Texas. That was won from somebody in El Paso, from someone here in this state. So I think that is the highest office an El Pasoan has ever come to.
Right. It's, for most Texans, El Paso is kind of a satellite off in space somewhere. When you get there, you're halfway to L.A.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
And yet, it's had a very interesting and distinguished history. Tell me a little bit about your parents.
So, my dad, Pat Francis O'Rourke, my mom, Melissa Martha Williams, both born and raised in El Paso. My mom to a family of entrepreneurs. They owned a furniture store that her mother started in 1950 called Charlotte's Furniture. My dad worked in real estate, worked as an engineer, and then ultimately served in county office, first as a county commissioner, then as a county judge. As a Democrat in the early 1980s, when being a Democrat in Texas really meant something, as it is again today, right? And I remember Mark White, the governor then of the state of Texas, coming to El Paso, this satellite community, the only city in the Mountain Time Zone, and having these big pachangas. And I remember, for me, politics as a kid was drinking Coors beer in the backyard and having fun and rallying and organizing with people. And so he introduced me and my sisters to politics, to our civic responsibility and opportunities, but also to the joy and fun that you feel when you are with people, part of something bigger than yourself. And that stuck with me. And I grew up incredibly, painfully shy. Never in a million years thinking that I would be in this line of work, but something that he exposed me to, and some of the joy that I saw in his life, I think certainly stayed with me. And after starting a small business in El Paso in the late 90s, I served on the city council, served in Congress, and then really for the last 5 years I've been traveling the state of Texas with people in communities not unlike El Paso. Now, they may not be in West Texas. I may be in Palestine or Pittsburgh or Quanah or Spearman or Dumas or Pampa, where Woody Guthrie wrote some of the American classics that still define and distinguish this country. But those folks feel much the way that we did after Democrats lost power in El Paso. No one visited us. No one knew that we existed. Nobody cared about the opportunities or needs that we had. By showing up there and making connections with people, it feels right. It kind of feels like it did back in the 1980s in the backyards in El Paso. So both of them really made my mom and dad a strong, strong impression on me. We lost my dad about 21 years ago, and my mom is still going strong.
Okay, yes. So you discovered punk music when you were in the 8th grade.
Did, yeah.
And then, I knew you had been in a band, but I didn't know you'd been in 5 bands. Is that how many I counted? Is that how many you were in?
Maybe. I don't know.
It's hard to remember some of that.
It was a long time ago, but you know what? There's definitely a connection. In our case, we were lucky enough to tour, to be able to put out records and music, and to travel and to be with people, meet them where they were, listen to their songs. Very often you're the traveling band, you're opening up for whoever's bigger on the ticket, or you're getting to listen to, the local players. Find out what makes that community tick, and you are dependent upon the generosity and the kindness of others, because you might make $30 or $50 from that show, and so you've got to sleep on someone's couch or someone's floor, eat in someone's kitchen, and that really stuck with me as well. And I see that as I travel the state today. So many people who've been laboring in the wilderness in some of these rural communities, for example, that have been Republican represented for the last 30 years. And yet when we come to town, they open their doors big and wide. They're excited to do this work with us. They find that joy and that fun that I see in politics or in music or in being with people or in joining in something that's bigger than any single one of us. The purpose, the function that you feel when you're doing that is awesome. And I got that from music, and I certainly feel that now in what we're doing in this campaign.
So you went off to Columbia, and you had turned your back on Texas. Is that right?
Honestly, I could not wait to get out of El Paso. Yeah. I subscribed to Maximum Rock and Roll, which was the Bible of punk rock at the time. And I'd see the tour schedule of every band that I listened to, everyone's record that I've sent away for and had come in. And they'd play in Tucson on Thursday, and they'd play here in Austin on Saturday. I knew that they had to drive through El Paso, but they never stopped. I never got to see them. And music was my life, and so I wanted to be at the epicenter of what I thought was most exciting about music. And for me, that was New York. It was CBGB's was still in operation. You could see all of these extraordinary bands that I'd only read about or listened to on record, and I loved it. And I worked in the city for a few years after I graduated, and then there was this epiphany. One day I was taking the subway to where I worked up in the Bronx, and it was packed and it was crowded and the air conditioning didn't work, and we were in the depths of summer, and I was like pressed up against the glass in an overcrowded car, and I just said, I don't think I'm a New Yorker. I'd love to get back to Texas. And I went and visited an old girlfriend on Long Island, bought a truck for $1,000, packed it with all my stuff, and my friend Mike Stevens jumped in, and we drove from New York to El Paso. And I really never looked back. Best decision I ever made. And from starting a business to serving in public office to meeting my wife Amy, with whom I'm celebrating 17 years of marriage today. Best decision I ever made. So I just lucked out, and I love that we're raising our kids. Ulysses, who's about to be 16, his sister Molly, who's 14, their brother Henry, 11, he's about to be 12, that we get to raise them in this town. That when I was there and when I could not itch to leave, or I couldn't wait to leave, I didn't realize I was raised in this embarrassment of riches. Whether it's the culture of the border, the Rocky Mountains that are called the Franklins as they pass through our community, the connection with Ciudad Juarez, the Rio Grande, it's extraordinary. And top among all of that are the people in that community who distinguish themselves by their kindness and their warmth. And we're a community of 1 million people. You won't have 20 murders a year in El Paso, Texas. It's routinely named one of, if not the safest cities in America. And I would argue, regardless of the rhetoric that you might hear from our current governor or a former president, that is not in spite of the fact that we are a city of immigrants. It is because of the fact that we are a city of immigrants. That's what makes us so strong and successful and safe.
So, in 2005, you ran for the El Paso City Council. What drew you into politics?
I was a small business owner, and I was out there hustling every day to win clients and deliver for them. We had a technology business. We built websites. We did design work. We then started to do more sophisticated business-to-business application and online program development. And through the course of that, I'm a Rotarian. I'm in the Chamber of Commerce. I'm in the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. I'm a joiner. I want to do anything.
This is a long way from punk rock.
It's a long way from punk rock, right? The more I become engaged, the more that I see, the more that I experience, the more people that I meet and listen to, the more excited and turned on I am about El Paso and this extraordinary community. No other place like it on the face of the planet, conjoined with Ciudad Juarez, forming the largest binational community on the planet. And I didn't feel like we were making the most of it. We were also publishing an online newspaper called StantonStreet.com, and we were covering City Hall and the binational relationship between the United States and Mexico. And anyhow, all of that really compelled me to see if I could not do something more in terms of contributing back to this community. And so ran for office, knocking on doors every single day. In fact, that was my courtship of Amy. We met that year as I was campaigning for city council, and we'd knock on 100, 120 doors a day. And it was really kind of trial by fire for her. Does she like this?
She knew what she was getting
into. So truth in advertising, this might very well be our future. And we won this race, and we did it by meeting, listening to, learning from the people that we wanted to serve and represent. And though I've had the chance to serve in Congress and I've been able to do some fun things over the course of my life, in many ways that job was the most meaningful. You met every week, and you met in front of the people that you served, and there was no buffer, no protection. You heard directly from the folks that put you into that position of public trust. And whether it was on economic development, or if someone's trash didn't get picked up on Tuesday, or your neighbor's dog wouldn't stop barking and you want me to do something about it, being held accountable in that way, in a very public way, and feeling the pressure and a little bit of anxiety in my gut, as Amy knows, when I'd ride off to work on Tuesday during our city council meetings, made me such a better representative, and I hope such a better human being, and opened me up to people whose lives I otherwise never would have learned about, problems I never would have known, solutions that we developed by finding a way to collaborate and work together. And as you know, on a city council in Texas, you're not a Republican, you're not a Democrat, you're just there to deliver for the people who put you there, and it was fantastic. So I did that, and then ran for Congress in 2012 against an 8-term incumbent who ended up outspending us 5-1. And nothing new under the sun, not a sophisticated strategy, but we just knocked doors every day, all day for 9 months straight. I knocked on over 16,000 doors myself, and I got to know so many people and saw how effective that is. And in my opinion, the TV ads may be a necessary evil, and the stuff we do on social media maybe or maybe not effective. But when two humans connect, eyeball to eyeball, face to face, especially in this very divided moment, in a time where we're so consumed by digital devices, there's really something transcendent about it. And I have this funny moment where I was walking into a diner on a Monday, and a guy stops me. This is towards the end of the campaign, and he says, "You're Beto, right?" He said, "You knocked on my grandmother's door on Thursday, and she invited you in. And you guys didn't even talk about politics or policy or even your city council race. She bragged about her grandson, who is in the Marines, her daughter, who's a school teacher, and just how tough that is for her. And you all had coffee, and 30 minutes later, you left." Well, he said, "On Sunday, after your visit, I and my 32 cousins who gathered her house every Sunday for menudo, she made us each promise to vote for you. And so he said, I know you're going to win this, Beto. You know, don't mess this up because we're going to put you in." And this stuff works, and it's by and large how we're running this race for governor now. 92,000 volunteers, primarily in Texas, have raised their hand and said, "Give me a clipboard, put me on the doors of a complete stranger, and allow me to talk with them about the stakes of this election and what it's going to take in order for us to win." And in the most voter-suppressed, voter-intimidated state in the country, we're asking our volunteers to be on the doors of those who are the targets of this suppression and intimidation. And in what I hope is going to be some powerful poetic and political justice, make them the margin of victory when we win this on the night of November 8th.
Just in reference to your anniversary today, is it really true that your mom and Amy's dad used to date?
Your research runs deep. Can I tell this story? So, Amy's parents, Bill and Sita, are wonderful. And I didn't know this until Amy and I started dating. Set up, by the way, on a blind date. Went to pick her up, drove her as any good El Paso boy will do, especially from someone who wasn't raised in El Paso. Amy grew up in Chicago and in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and was new to the city. So I drove her to the Kentucky Club in Ciudad Juarez. And we had margaritas where they were invented. When she introduced me to her parents, I learned that our folks had been out on a double date. Her dad had been dating my mom, and my dad had been taking somebody else out, and they kind of cross-pollinated my parents. They met on that outing, fell in love, and there would be a joke at the dinner table because Amy's dad, Bill, you asked who the most successful politician out of El Paso was, and I mentioned Ari Thomason. Probably, arguably, the most successful business person was her dad, Bill Sanders, who moved to Chicago in the early 1970s. And we would joke at the O'Rourke table that if my mom had played her cards right, I would have grown up as his son.
Yeah.
So, stranger than fiction, we end up getting married. And Bill, by the way, did not like me at all. As I was dating his daughter, just would not hide his contempt for me. But since then, we've really become close. And my dad, I mentioned, passed away before I had ever met Amy, and he's really become kind of a second father to me. And again, moving back to El Paso just opened up so many extraordinary opportunities and beautiful relationships for me. So, yeah, that's how they met.
So it's a closely knit community.
It's a very closely knit community. Yeah.
So you ran against Ted Cruz in 1998, and you got more votes as a Democrat than anyone in the history of the state. Came within 2 points. It was a close election. And then you ran for president. Many of your supporters feel like that was a mistake. How do you look back on that?
I look back on that with deep gratitude for the fact that I even had a chance. As all of us, I think, feel at this moment, we want to make sure that we're doing everything we can with what we have, where we are, to overcome what I would argue are existential challenges. This attack on voting rights and our democracy, which we all get did not end when that insurrection was repelled on the 6th of January 2021. It is rolling through so many state legislatures right now, nowhere more so than in Texas, where we make it harder to vote here than anywhere else. We think of the existential threat of climate. For those kids in classrooms on Monday, the question about whether they're going to survive the school year. For women in this crisis of maternal mortality, whether they're going to survive their pregnancy. And against that, we've got to do everything we can at this moment. We've got to try. And so that opportunity to potentially be able to bring this extraordinary coalition that we had built in Texas of old and young people, Democrats, independents, and Republicans, largest voter turnout in Texas history since 1970, bring that to bear against the greatest threat that this country's faced, at least in our lifetimes. Not just Donald Trump, but this tearing apart of our country and our democracy. So grateful that I got to do that. And it didn't work out, but in the end, just like my parents meeting on that double date back in the early 1970s, things worked out. I think the right person was ultimately selected by the people of this country for the job. And while he's not perfect, no one is, the fact that we've been able to get such extraordinary progress on so many meaningful things, climate not the least of them, the fact that hundreds of thousands of kids are going to be lifted out of poverty thanks to the action that we see from this president, the infrastructure that will be spent in communities that are so underserved right now across the state of Texas, and that we go in with spirits lifted in the final 45 days of this race. It worked out, and I think I am right now in the place that I'm supposed to be with the people that I'm supposed to be running this campaign with. Nowhere do these issues come to a head like Texas. And just imagine the shockwaves sent through this state, through this country, if for the first time since Ann Richards did it in 1990, we elect not only a Democrat, but a Democrat who believes in science, who believes that a woman should be able to make her own decisions about her own body and her own future, who prioritizes the lives of our children over the interests of the NRA, who has the backs of public school educators and counselors and librarians, the very people who are under attack, who says to members of the LGBTQ community, you will no longer be attacked in your own state. We are going to make sure that we have your back and you're treated equally under the law. The things that we can do here in a place where many Americans feel like it will last be possible to happen forever changes what is possible for the rest of this country. And so I'm, again, grateful to be in this. And, you know, the great thing is, you asked me backstage, you know, how does it look out there in Texas? And I'll tell you, whether we're in a small rural community, in a big city like this one, people are turning out at levels that I've never seen before, including in 2018. And I'm smart enough now to know they're not turning out for me, and they're not turning out for the Democratic Party. They're turning out to make sure that together we are more than a match for this moment. And instead of submitting or succumbing to this, we're going to be overcoming these challenges, and we're going to win on November 8th. And so I feel grateful to be a part of it.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the race. The Morning News had a poll out last weekend that shows you behind 9 points. UT has about the same time poll saying 5 points behind. Now, each of these is a different narrative about your campaign. One is that you're holding steady within striking distance but not gaining. The other is it's drifting out of possibility. How do you see it, and how do you propose to close that gap?
As anyone who's asked this question, whose polling is not where they want it to be, would say, the only poll that matters is the one that we take on election.
Yeah.
What I'll tell you is that from 2018, on the eve of that historic race for Senate, where though we did not win, we helped 12 Democrats win positions in the state legislature. We helped flip control of the House of Representatives in Washington, D.C. Colin Allred, Lizzie Panel Fletcher won races in Texas. 17 black women won election to judicial positions in Harris County. On the eve of that election, where I lost by 2.6% to Ted Cruz, the polls had us down 7 to 9 points. So, you know, I take these polls with a grain of salt. And I also remember that when that special election took place in Kansas, a referendum in the dead of summer, people turned out at near presidential election levels. No one saw a 60-40 victory for pro-choice and reproductive health care freedom. When you look at Alaska, New York, Minnesota, you see either issues like choice or Democrats outperforming the polls by, on average, 9 points so far. But again, I'll tell you, the energy, the enthusiasm, the commitment that I see from people, 92,000 times over signing up to do really tough work. I mean, knocking on doors in this heat, you're not only going to sweat through your shirt, you'll sweat through your socks and your shoes, but they're willing to do that, and they're not waiting to do it in October or November. They're doing this right now. The turnout, the energy that we see is about making sure that Texas comes through. And another one of these historical lessons that we see in this book, you know, abortion in 1972 was just as outlawed as it is in Texas today. But no one rode to the rescue of Texas women back then. It was Jane Roe, a Texas woman, her two attorneys, Linda Coffey and Sarah Weddington from Abilene, Texas, who prevailed upon an all-male United States Supreme Court to win the right to privacy, to ensure that women can make very private and sometimes very painful decisions without government intervention. So my belief is that if Texas women won that right in 1973 with Roe versus Wade, they're going to win that back through this election in 2022. My money's on Texas women.
Another issue that you face that seems to favor the Republicans is immigration. Trump and the Republicans put down an idea, the wall. It's easy to understand, it's very expensive, it doesn't work very well, but it's an idea. The Democrats really haven't had a counter to that. So how would you approach the immigration issue?
There's a reason that our immigration laws have not been rewritten effectively since Ronald Reagan was the president of the United States. This is tough. It doesn't fit on a bumper sticker. The things that do, like building a wall, don't do anything to make us any safer or address the issue of people who want to come to this country to work or join family or seek asylum. It's going to require some really tough work, and it means that no one will get everything that they want. We cannot allow the perfect to become the enemy of the good. And in fact, the only way it will work is if Democrats and Republicans can come together. So, Larry, here's what I've heard as I've traveled the state, listening to Republicans in rural communities, listening to Democrats right here in Austin or in our hometown of El Paso, Texas. All of us to a person believe very strongly that if you want to come to this country, you must follow the law. But I think almost all of us, including Republicans, and I want to stress this, understand that our laws need to follow our values, our interests, and our needs. And let me be clear about what I mean, because Amy gave me some constructive criticism at breakfast this morning. She's like, what does that mean, Beto, when you say our values, our interests, our needs? When I'm in La Mesa, meeting with a cotton grower in this part of rural Texas, he says, our immigration system is broken, and the way I know that, I cannot find anyone to work on this land. When I go to the cotton gin in Roscoe, 46 jobs in that gin, and the manager there says, it doesn't matter, Beto, what I pay someone to work here. No one born in Roscoe or Sweetwater or anywhere in Texas wants this kind of work. The only people willing to do it are those who literally come into this country for the privilege of producing the fibers that we're wearing on our backs right now. So what if we said this? What if we led on a Texas-based guest worker program with the humility of understanding that there are many who come to this country who don't want to stay here, who love Mexico just as much as I love the United States of America and Texas, and if able to, would love to return and be there with their families. But with a broken immigration system, if they have crossed, they're undocumented, they're here right now, their only alternative to be with their families is to ask them to come up and join them here, providing this perverse incentive to break the law in America right now. A Texas-based guest worker program allows us to meet our economic opportunity, the needs that we have in our economy, supply chain problems, inflation issues, all connected to immigration. And Texas, the defining border and immigrant state, could lead the way for our country. We could do the same thing for those who want to join family members, who are in the back of a 20-year line. That's the immigration wait time from Mexico, the Philippines, India, today. Or if you want to seek asylum, get ready to wait 6 years for the adjudication of your claim. How about 6 weeks? And if you pass, welcome to America. And if you don't, you must return to your country of origin. If we had solutions instead of the wall or busing migrants to DC or Chicago, then we'd actually be able to get something done. And then let me just indulge me for this last part of it. And it is personal You and I spoke about this at my home year before last. If we don't solve this, we are going to continue to see our fellow Americans, our fellow human beings pitted against each other with devastating consequences. In 2019, after being repeatedly warned of invasions of immigrants who are coming here, described by the former president as animals, as an infestation, which is what I think about cockroaches or rats, things that you want to exterminate or kill. When at a rally in Florida, Trump says, "What are we going to do about this invasion?" And someone in the crowd yells out, "Shoot him!" And everyone, literally everyone, laughs. And Trump smirks his assent, and they continue with the rally. When Greg Abbott in Texas in 2019 says about this so-called invasion, "Texans, we must defend ourselves, take matters into our own hands." There was a guy in Allen, Texas, in North Texas, who heard all this loud and clear. Orders an AK-47, a weapon originally designed for use in war, in a battlefield, to kill people, because that high-impact, high-velocity round just shreds all of the soft tissue inside of your body so you bleed to death before we can do anything to save your life. So disturbing that he ordered that, his mom calls the police in Allen and says, "What the hell does my son need with this?" She may have also signaled other signs of distress in his life. Because we don't have a red flag law on the books, nothing the cops could do. "You're on your own, ma'am. Good luck. We'll see you later." He drives that 650 miles to El Paso, Texas, posts online that he has come to repel the invasion of Hispanics that he has been warned about, and then walks into a Walmart in central El Paso the Saturday before school starts that year and kills 23 people in a city that doesn't lose 20 people in a year in a matter of minutes. Grandparents, parents, school children in that community, anyone who to him looked like an immigrant. And lest we think that is the last of it, Dan Patrick, the lieutenant governor in this state, when those 14,000 Haitian refugees were huddled under that bridge in Del Rio, goes on Fox News and says, if we let these folks in, they're going to have kids. Those kids are going to grow up and they're going to vote for Democrats, and then we will be replaced. This replacement theory is not on the fringe of the internet. It is being trafficked by those in positions of power right now. The governor, the lieutenant governor, people who influence others across the state. We must solve immigration, not only to do right by and for one another, and to solve something that has been bandied about, talked about, campaigned on for decades, but we've got to solve it because it is existential for the people in our communities, nowhere more so than El Paso. So when we win, we make this a priority, we dispense with the stunts, and we get down to solutions.
There's no question, if you get elected, it'll be a thunderbolt in American politics. In the whole world, it'll be echoing. On the other hand, Texas has a weak governor state. A lot of the issues that we're talking about, abortion, guns, immigration, as a governor, you don't have a whole lot of authority, which is one of the reasons that Greg Abbott is all about theatrics. That's what he can do. So let's say you are elected and you're facing your first legislative session. What do you hope to accomplish?
First, I'm going to be looking forward to working with Rochelle Garza as our Attorney General, and Mike Collier as our Lieutenant Governor, and Jay Clayburgh as our Land Commissioner. And I think we're going to have more Democrats in the legislature than many people think, because I think not only will there be a thunderclap at the top of the ticket, I think this referendum on the extremism and failed leadership in Texas will be felt up and down the ballot. But to your point, the only way I was able to do anything on the El Paso City Council is to find that majority of colleagues who would work with me on an idea or a proposal or a solution. In Congress, I served 6 years, every day in the minority, meaning I was outnumbered by Republicans, and I could go back to an audience like this one at a town hall meeting that Cynthia Cano would help us run and just say, look, those Republicans, they're awful. Keep reelecting me. One day I'll be in the majority, then I'll get something done for you. And I would have been laughed out of the room. I would have been embarrassed to have ever said something like that. So I always made the virtue of the necessity of reaching across the aisle and finding the common ground and recognizing I won't be able to get my vision of perfection accomplished, but I can do something better than what we have today. We opened up mental health care access, for example, for veterans who had an other than honorable discharge, who were precluded from setting foot in the VA, and they were killing themselves at twice the rate of the general veterans population, which is already frighteningly high. I wrote that bill with Mike Kaufman, who changed significantly my original proposal, but we defended it on the floor of the House, got it passed 435-0, passed again in the Senate, and Donald Trump, someone with whom I agree on almost nothing, signed that into law. That's the same approach that I'll bring to my role as governor. You know, funding our schools, it's popular, it sells here in Austin, but go to Montague County, go to Bowie, Texas, where the average teacher there is underpaid by $15,500 a year against the national average. You better believe there will be the political pressure on that Republican representative to meet me halfway on that issue. Medicaid expansion, which would bring $10 billion of our federal income taxes back to Texas every year to connect more people with care. It's going to help the diabetic here in Austin who today cannot afford insulin, can't get treated, and isn't going to live very long if we don't change course. But in rural communities where 16 hospitals have closed down on Greg Abbott's watch because we don't have Medicaid expansion, there is going to be the political consensus there to get that done. So improving healthcare access, funding our public schools, investing in infrastructure so that we attract more better paying jobs, getting behind labor and the ability to organize so that we have the training and the workforce, the level of pay, raising the minimum wage, and then protecting a woman's right to make her own decisions. These are universal values and universally popular across the state of Texas. This abortion ban that we talked about at the outset, Greg Abbott's total abortion ban, most extreme law in the country, 78% of Republicans in this state oppose it. So the common ground, the consensus is there. We just need a leader who will make the most of it. And that's going to be my objective and my goal.
I'm going to ask for questions. Now, if you see the number up there, I can't see it myself, but send in your questions. And while our interlocutor is coming out, I'll just ask you about the Democratic Party in Texas. The Republican Party in California, for instance, has completely collapsed. You know, how many losing years can the Democratic Party in Texas go without total failure?
It's been decades that the National Party, national donors have basically left the state party to its own devices. And I think very close to withering on the vine, but for these extraordinary, overwhelmingly young, but Texans of all age, but these young men and women who nonetheless step up and either volunteer or serve in a paid capacity with the party and have made as their primary focus this year the registration of voters who are targeted for the suppression and intimidation. They are going to play a critical role in the victory that we are going to celebrate on November 8th, but it's bigger than the mothership in Austin. I mentioned these precinct chairs and county chairs in places like San Angelo or Lamesa or Abilene or Pampa. They've kept the faith and they've kept up the fight. And they've done it without any resources being transferred from the state party or the national party over to them. In other words, I think this party is really comprised of so many millions of Texans that we may not think about when we just look at the budget of the Texas Democratic Party or the amount that we spend on television ads. These folks are at the forefront of the most important fight that we've ever been in, a fight for the lives, literally, of our fellow Texans. And I believe this thunderclap that you described that the rest of the country will see when we win on the night of November 8th, that will prove this concept. And I think the resources will come in to make sure that we can support candidates up and down the ballot, especially coming into 2030, the decennial year after which we will redistrict Texas again. And we'll either get these same god-awful gerrymandered districts where the people in power are choosing their voters instead of the other way around, or we'll get districts that are drawn to bring people in to the very right to vote. So this is a long-term plan that we're part of, but the first step is winning this election in November.
So we have some questions.
Yeah, thank you for your questions. First one, how can Democrats better frame their views on immigration, the grid, public education, healthcare, and other issues in terms of finances, not just what is right?
The question is about how do we talk about this in terms of finances, not just about what is morally right. I mean, the moral imperative, that might compel a lot of us. Let's just do the right thing, right? But for the hard-hearted among us, how do we make the case, right? Some people will plead poverty. How could we afford to expand health care access to more than 1 million additional Texans? Well, we're the 9th largest economy on the face of the planet, $250 billion biannual budget. We don't lack for resources. But if you needed something to sweeten the deal, the federal government will pay 90 cents on the dollar for expansion. Again, returning our federal income taxes, $10 billion a year to us. It will generate more than $30 billion in additional positive economic activity throughout our communities. It brings hundreds of thousands of new Texans onto the payrolls, not just medical providers, but support staff, administrators, other people who are involved in the provision of care. And then this is the kicker. In a state where today the average Texan is paying more in taxes than the average Californian, by expanding Medicaid, we'll be able to bring down your property taxes. Right now, you are on the hook for compensating indigent health care in your county hospitals. With Medicaid expansion, we now make sure that that's taken care of in a much more effective, efficient, and cost-saving way. So we'll bring your taxes down as well. Yeah. Not a bad deal.
All right. As the midterms are drawing near, what advice do you have for young voters who might feel nihilistic about whether or not their vote matters?
We're going right to where young voters are. We are going to a series of college campuses from Houston-Tillotson to the University of Texas at Austin. We'll be at the University of Texas at El Paso, right near our home. We've been to places like Paul Quinn and Texas Southern University, Wiley in Marshall, Texas, to junior colleges, to IBEW apprenticeship halls where Amy and I met young women and men who are in their apprenticeship, 5 years where they are earning while they are learning, where they will then graduate to be journeymen and journeywomen and command significant salaries. And we show up to all these places to listen to and learn from those who are going to bear the brunt of the decisions that we make, including how we vote in this next election. And what has so impressed me is, you all know that that old line about, you young people are going to be the leaders of the future is just, it's baloney. I mean, they're the leaders right now at this moment. The urgency that they feel on these issues, the leadership that they're already providing, the acutely tuned bullshit detector on anything that any one of us, including me, says that doesn't match the truth or isn't backed up with a solid plan to get it done. That reinforces my conviction that not only are we going to win, but that we're going to come through. And a reminder, at every major turn of this state and this country's history, these momentous decisions and changes were led by young people. 1944, landing on the beaches of Normandy, it wasn't people Larry's age or my age. It was 17, 18, and 19-year-olds. John Lewis, in March of 1965, is 24 years young, and behind him and in front of him and with him are 17 and 18 and 19-year-olds. We know about the Children's Crusade around that same time in Alabama, where 11, 12, and 13-year-olds are going to jail to fight for the right to vote and for their right to be treated equally under the law. This is one of those momentous occasions where every right that we cherish is under attack. And young people, perhaps more than anyone else, they're standing up to be counted to make sure that we overcome these challenges. So I'm right there with them every step of the way. They are why we are going to win this.
Thank you. Texas's Department of Family Protective Services has been in a consistent state of crisis. What would you do differently than our current governor to break this cycle?
So 7 years ago, a federal judge here in Texas, Judge Janice Jack, wrote an opinion from her bench about child protective services, the foster care system in this state. And she said to all of us, including Governor Abbott, the children who emerge from this system are more damaged than when they originally went in. We must do something about this. We are in crisis. In January of this year, 7 years later. She says that program that I first warned you about has gone from bad to worse. Just since 2020, 100 kids have died in the custody and care of Child Protective Services, in the custody and care of you and I, right? A government of, by, and for the people. This one is on all of us. Hundreds more have been raped, have been abused, have been trafficked. You all saw the story about the 11, 12, and 13-year-old girls who were rescued, they thought, from a trafficking ring and then turned over to a private provider in Bastrop nearby, where they were once again abused by the people that we pay with our tax dollars, all under this governor's watch. This is part of a theme in his leadership. Warned about an issue like the failing grid, like CPS, like gun violence in our schools, he does absolutely nothing, and people are harmed and lose their lives. And to make it worse, instead of focusing on solving that issue, he tries to distract us by making us afraid of or even hating our fellow Texans. And I'll give you an example. What does Greg Abbott think about transgender Texans? I don't know. I never heard him talk about this until suddenly he's coming upon a midterm election, and there's a crisis of transgender kids using the bathroom at the middle school or playing on the soccer team or even just existing. And he's now targeted their parents with arrest for child abuse for raising and loving their kids. And I've met the parents of these transgender children, and they're doing everything they can for their kids, now knowing that those children, for whom they've already sacrificed so much, may be taken from their custody and turned over where? To Child Protective Services, the worst-run foster care program in the United States of America today. So the question is, what do we do about it? These CPS caseworkers are overworked and under-resourced. These kids that they are overseeing are sleeping in the CPS offices, in motel rooms. We need to make sure that we hire more of these CPS caseworkers, that we change our laws, including the one in Texas that says you can be too gay to adopt a child out of the foster care program right now. Being in a same-sex relationship is grounds for denying adoption right now in this state. Talk about deviating from equal treatment under the law in Texas right now. And then just elevating those children who are the most vulnerable among us to make sure that they get the care that they deserve. And to the question earlier about, well, beyond the morality of this, Beto, why is this good for all of us? When these young people are able to fully realize their potential and live to their promise, not only will they be doing better for themselves, but they're going to do great things for everyone else. And that's why I want to make sure that we do the right thing now. Thanks.
Do you regret confronting Governor Abbott and other Texas officials in Uvalde after the tragedy there? Or do you think issues like gun violence require that sort of aggressive action?
You know, when that shooting happened in Uvalde on the 24th of May of this year, I first learned about it the same way many of you did, from our governor. He happened to be in Abilene, Texas, and at a press conference, at that point, he knew that 14 children had died. He knew that it was still an active crime scene, that there were still more bodies being recovered, more parents who didn't yet know the fate of their children. And as he wrapped up that press conference, he had a decision to make about where he would go next. He could travel due south about 300 miles to Uvalde, or he could go to a previously scheduled fundraiser 285 miles in the opposite direction. He got on a private jet from one of his campaign contributors, flew to the fundraiser, was there for at least 3 hours, and then not until the next day does he show up in Uvalde, and the first words out of his mouth, and I was there sitting right where you are, he said, "It could have been worse," to those families of those children who were defenseless not only against a guy who could legally purchase not one but 2 AR-15s and hundreds of rounds of ammunition, but defenseless against a governor who, despite the fact that 5 of the worst mass shootings in U.S. history have taken place in this state in the last 5 years on his watch, has done nothing but make it easier for people to be able to carry guns in public without a background check, without any training, without any vetting whatsoever. Gun violence is the leading cause of death for kids and teenagers in this state as of this year. More cops have been gunned down in Texas than any other state in the union. That's why they pled with him not to sign permitless carry into law, but he turned his back on them and did it anyhow. So no, I don't regret being there. I wanted to fight for those families in Uvalde, for our families across the state. The best time to stop the next school shooting is right now. And it means, at a minimum, raising the age of purchase for an AR-15 to 21 years. It means red flag laws. It means a universal background check. It means placing our kids ahead of any other interest. The fact that the children of Texas started this school year last month no better protected against an active shooter than those kids in Uvalde at the end of May is an indictment not just on Greg Abbott, but on all of us until we do something about it and change it. The best way to change that is to win this election on November 8th.
Just to follow up on that, your stance is to raise the age for a purchase of an AR-15, not to take away the weapon itself. What led to that thinking?
Like many people that I've listened to, importantly, families in El Paso and Midland, Odessa, and Sutherland Springs, and Santa Fe and Galveston County, and now in Uvalde, I don't think there is a reason for anybody outside of a war zone to have an AR-15 or an AK-47. Its only real use is to kill human beings. It's what it was designed for. The AR-15 originally introduced when we were fighting in Vietnam, to take an enemy soldier down at 500 yards and be able to penetrate a steel helmet. Those kids in Uvalde, they weren't 500 yards away. They weren't wearing anything on their heads but a baseball cap. So I still strongly believe that. But as I've said on issue after issue that we've talked about, the important thing is to get something done and not to allow the perfect to become the enemy of the good. There are many things that we'll argue about, but on this issue of prioritizing the lives of our children, I have sought out and found that common ground. Republicans, non-gun owners, Democrats, gun owners alike can agree on raising the age of purchase, on a red flag law so we can intervene before it's too late, and on a universal background check that just simply says if you're going to buy a gun in Texas, we're cool with that. We just want to make sure that you are not going to be a danger to yourself or to anyone else. These three steps will save lives, allow us to defend the Second Amendment while doing a better job of protecting the lives of the people in our communities.
Why are Hispanic and Latino voters in the Valley and other areas of Texas shifting towards Republican candidates?
One important thing that I want to say at the outset is a lot of ink has been spilled. I guess a lot of pixels have been consumed on this issue since 2020, when Donald Trump performed far better than he had in 2016 in Hidalgo and Cameron and Starr and Zapata, and even in our home county of El Paso. Overwhelmingly Mexican-American majority border communities that had a front row seat to family separation, to kids in cages, to this xenophobic, hateful rhetoric that inspired that shooter who came to my hometown in 2019. What explains that outcome? I think there are many reasons. One, from many of those voters that I've listened to since then, they say, hey, Beto, these things that I just described, they're all important to me, but voting on that basis is a luxury if I can't guarantee that I'm going to have a job or afford this roof over my head or be able to feed my family. Republicans showed up with a very strong, compelling economic message. From Trump, it was literally one syllable, one word. It was jobs. And he kind of offered a false choice. I can either keep you holed up in your house during this pandemic, or I can open up all places of employment and prioritize the economy. What did we have on our side? Nothing. Candidate Biden didn't spend a dime or a day in the Rio Grande Valley or really anywhere in Texas for that matter, once we got down the home stretch of the general election. Democrats, maybe an overabundance of caution, literally phoned in their campaigns during the election. Lots of good ones, and I love them, and they worked hard, but they did this at a distance. And as I said earlier, you got to be locking eyeballs with the people that you want to fight for and serve, and whose votes that you want to win. And Republicans were doing that throughout the Rio Grande Valley. But having said all of that, Hispanics, Latinos, Mexican Americans, overwhelmingly throughout Texas voted for Joe Biden against Donald Trump. And I am making sure that we do not commit the same sin as some Democrats before me have committed, which is to take voters of color, black voters, and Latinos for granted, saying, you know what, you have voted for me in the past, I can just count on you voting for me again. I'm not going to spend the time making the trip down to Edinburgh or to McAllen or to Roma to be with you where you are in your community. I'm going to go chase that white suburban soccer mom in Collin County or Denton County. Those goals are not mutually exclusive if you're willing to put in the work. We got to show up for everyone, everywhere, write nobody off, take no one for granted. And I'll say this in closing on this question. The most watched newscast in the San Antonio market, in the Dallas market, in the Houston market, in the El Paso market, in the Rio Grande Valley market is in Spanish. It's either Telemundo or Univision. Now that does not mean, of course, that every Hispanic voter speaks Spanish or wants to get their information in Spanish, but it does mean that millions of our fellow Texans do. And being able to be held accountable by those voters, by reporters and members of the media in Spanish, to respond in the language that so many of our fellow Texans speak and prefer. That is a competitive advantage that we have in this campaign. It's a show of respect and courtesy that we are going to continue to show. And I was sharing this with Larry. The governor, thankfully has agreed to one debate so far. We've agreed to 4 others. One of those debates, every single question and every answer will be given in Spanish, and we will do it regardless of whether he shows up.
Well, thank you, Beto. This has been, I think, a very informative hour, and we appreciate your spending it with us, and good luck in your campaign, and thank you all for coming out for the Texas Tribune.
Thank you all. Very grateful to you. Appreciate it.
Well, you were terrific.